Hello guys, welcome to my Learning Python series, in which series I teach basic Python for beginner coders. So in this video I'll be talking about functions and what are functions and the syntax of them and how to call them. I'll talk about all of this, and this is our code from the previous video which hasn't come out yet. I'm recording this back to back. Anyway, so what is a function? A function is, so we have in coding is basically a set of movement, a set of instructions that the coder, i.e. you or me or smarter people than us, write it, and they give it to the CPU. They dump all that code onto the CPU, well, after it's been compiled, and the CPU be like, oh, instructions, I should follow them, and they do the instructions. The thing is, code can get pretty big and pretty ugly pretty fast. So I'm just for example, I'm gonna pull up my Pac-Man code, which this code has genuinely depressed me. I spent so long on this code, and it's still buggy for some reason. I don't know why. It's still buggy. And if you look at the code, it's just classes and functions. So the code in total is a grand total of a mere 636 lines of code, which is extremely inefficient. It still doesn't work. So I reckon this game would be done in 1000 lines. If I was really optimizing it, I can get with around 800-700 lines of code. This will be a future project on my channel, by the way. Me trying to rebuild this whole thing. I'm not gonna try to fix it, I'm just gonna build it all over again. So yeah, you can see, so this is 636 lines of code. This is very messy. So that's why we have functions and classes. Classes will be a bit more advanced. I'll talk about them in 3 to 4 videos, but that's why we have functions. So we have this function, and this function holds a specific set of instructions, a lot of if and else statements, and a function is basically a chunk of code. So we have a program and we have a function. A function is a part of the program. It's a smaller part of the program, and it's used for things that we need regularly. So if you want to, like, again, go back to the tea method. If you want to make a cup of tea, instead of turning the program on every time for every cup of tea, you can just have a function that says make a cup of tea, and you can just call that function. Call that function is basically invoking that function. A little bit fancy terminology. It's basically putting that function into action. This will all make sense once I write the code. I hate to say it, but sometimes implementation is better than design. Anyway, so the syntax of function, you have def. Def came from define, and you have every function has a name, so you can call it. So let's call this function. Let's just call it main, which is a main function from the name. And you see we have parentheses over here. The parentheses over here are because a function takes for that cup of tea you need specific data, and for that function to function properly, see what I did there? For that function to function properly, it needs a bit of data to keep it ongoing. So a function can take data and pass out data. If I pull up my whiteboard here, this is my very beautiful drawing. So we have a code. We have a function. A function is a part of code. And if I zoom in, a function can take arguments in and pass arguments out. A function can take in many arguments and pass out many arguments. They're not necessary. It doesn't need arguments. It doesn't have to pass out arguments. but it can do it. it can do as many. If you want to pass in 10 arguments, then sure, go for it. If you want to pass out 10 arguments, then sure, go for it. I will keep it simple. I will pass in 2 arguments at most. I won't pass out any arguments in this tutorial, but there have been times where I have a 20 argument list. I have a pretty big one over here. If I just go to finding the path, somewhere over here. Yeah, this is a pretty big one. I pass speed, walls, ghost position, background position, self. This is a pretty big one. So I'll keep it simple today. So anyway, so for main to function, what I'm thinking to do with this function is that it takes in names and scores and prints them out. So we have the list of scores, we have the list of names, and we want this function to print them out. So let's change the name of this function and call it printout. Give the name of printout because this function will print out the names and the scores. So we have two things. We have two things in programming. One of them is called well, we have one thing which divides into two things. We have a scope of argument. So a scope of argument, if you think about it, we have a cone. So this is an argument. This is a variable or an argument. It has a cone of vision. Let's just say it's a cone of vision, and this cone of vision tells it where it is allowed to be used. So for it is basically a cone of accessibility instead of a cone of vision, but let's call it a cone of vision. This is my very beautiful argument. Don't bully my argument, please. And this cone of vision is relatively small, and we have this argument over here. This is the big boy. I'm having way too much fun. And this guy, he's wearing glasses. He's the real deal. So this guy has a big cone of vision. This guy has a small cone of vision. And what the cone of vision says, is it a local variable or is it a global variable? So as I said, we have code and we have a function. A function is a smaller part of the code. The variable has a local and a global scope. You can decide what scope it has, but a global scope means that it can be used anywhere in the program. A local scope means that it can be only used where it was defined and only where it was defined. So we have score over here. Score is a global variable because it was defined at the very beginning. It wasn't defined inside of a function or inside of a class, which I will be talking about later on. So this is a global variable. It is accessed by the whole program. So for this function, if we define a counter here, so if we start code in the function, we have a tab. Again, this just says everything down here is in that function. So if we want to have stuff, let's define counter equals 0, and this counter equals 0. Yeah? If I come outside the function and try to print counter, guess what? It will give me an error. It will give me an error that counter is not defined. It doesn't know what counter is. See, counter is not defined. It doesn't know it because counter was defined in the function, which means it has a local scope of vision. So the other parts of the program aren't able to use it. They don't know that it exists. Only the function knows that it exists. So here I will be using names and score, which I guess it should be called scores, but again my OCD kind of didn't help me there. So because I'm going to use those two lists, I'm going to pass them in. So I'm going to pass in, and those are called parameters or arguments. I'm going to pass in names and I'm going to pass in score. So I'm going to use those two arguments in the function, and that's why I passed them in. And what this function is going to do is just going to print every person with their respective score. So we're just going to have a for loop for I in range of names, and because names has the same length as score, this doesn't really matter. We can do print. We can put names I has the score of column and comma score I. Let me just zoom out a bit. Yep, and great, this function works properly. We just need to call it. We just need to call it now, because yeah, we have a function there. But what is it gonna do? If I run the program, what is it gonna do? I never called the function, and this bug has frustrated me so many times. I have a function that has like 30 or 40 lines of code that I know it works well, and my program just doesn't work because I never called the function. This is so annoying. So the way you call the function is that you just put the name of the function. It is case sensitive, and when you call the function, if I call this function, I'm gonna get an error because I didn't pass any arguments. So remember, here we passed the names and score, but over here we didn't pass anything, so we need to still pass them in. Those are just test names or placeholders to tell the function what to do when it gets those arguments. So I can pass in score and names, but this will make this function work not properly. So because I passed in scores first, and because I passed in names first, I need to pass it in over here first and then score. And if I call it now, I am not gonna get an error. But what is this? Cannot be interpreted as an integer object. Yeah. Noob error. I forgot to add the length function. Yep. And this works just fine. I showed how to get this output in the previous video. And the previous video, it was much easier. But again, functions have a lot of advantages. You can call them more than one time. So like, if I had an occasional thing of calculating a specific value, I don't do it every time. I just do it sometimes. It's good to have a module that says this is the name of the function, and I call it in whenever I need it. Doing this. A function can be reused in different programs. So I know that this function works. I can just control exit and put in another program because I know it works. I have tested it, and this makes my work easier. It makes it cleaner when you're debugging. You know where you went wrong because you can just say print haha, you are here. If you go over my programs in GitHub, you will see this many times, because sometimes an output just doesn't work the way that you want it, and you don't know which function was not called, so you just start doing random print statements to know where you are in the code. It makes it cleaner, honestly, and it is able to pass out arguments. So again, here I didn't pass out any arguments, but if I want to pass arguments, so let's define counter. Let's make a local variable called counter. So to make a local variable, it's the same way as a global variable. You just mind that there's a tab over here. So make it 0, and every iteration, add 1 to the counter plus equal 1, and I want to pass out that argument. So to pass out an argument, you just put return, and you put out as many arguments as you wish, separate them by a comma. So pass out counter because I'm only passing out one argument. However, this is a drastic change to the way that we call out the function. Because we are returning something, that means that when we call the function, we are assigning this value that is returned to some sort of variable. Again, if I'm calling this function and it has a return statement, it implies that I am assigning the returned value to a variable, which means I have here to have some sort of variable that holds that value. And if I had return counter, return names, return score, return etc., I have to have many variables, and here I would have to have as many variables as I passed out. They have to match, everything has to match. The numbers of parameters that you put in has to match the numbers of parameters that when you call the function. The numbers of parameters that you pass out has to be the same numbers of parameters. And just to make sure that this works, outside the function I'm gonna print the value of counter. Again, this is outside the function just to make sure that the value actually moves throughout the function. So you can make a local variable a global variable. You just have to pass it out to the function. So when you pass out a variable, you're giving the rest of the program access to that variable in some other way. So this is functions. They do get a bit more complicated than this. They do get a bit longer, a bit uglier. But yeah, that's basically it. You have a name, you have a parameter, you have a parameter. This is one of my worst programs, so you see it still has the same sort of way. It has local variables. I do pass those local variables because I am going to use them elsewhere in the program. And this is it. That's what functions are. They are incredibly useful. They are incredibly clean. They make your program look clean, and they are incredibly reusable. So I recommend using functions. Just every bit of code that is related in some way, slap a function into it, and boom, you have a modular program. You can go to your friends and be like, I can make modular programs, and you will sound very fancy and they will be very impressed. Just kidding, they probably won't. But yeah, it is very useful, and thank you for watching this video. Follow my Instagram, it's in the description, and I hope you found this video entertaining and somewhat informative and somewhat entertaining. The sun is coming out, it's like 4 AM. I'm recording my videos back to back. Anyway, thank you for watching, see you in the next one.